Before we dive into this wonderful, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like and share with others. In a small town nestled at the edge of rolling hills and sprawling meadows, there lived a man named Daniel. He wasn't wealthy, nor did he own land. He lived in a tiny, worn-down cottage on the outskirts of town, where the roof leaked when it rained, and the floor creaked with every step. But Daniel didn't mind. His heart was full of dreams that stretched far beyond the size of his home or the weight of his poverty. Daniel worked at a local horse stable owned by a wealthy landowner. From dawn until dusk, he mucked out stalls, fed the horses, brushed their coats, and cleaned their hooves. It was grueling, dirty work, but Daniel did it with unwavering joy. He treated each horse with tenderness, speaking to them as though they understood every word. "You're more than just a racehorse," he would whisper to the prized stallions. "You've got a heart bigger than this whole town." The horses seemed to sense his kindness. They nuzzled against him, whinnied happily when he arrived, and even the most temperamental ones calmed under his gentle hand. But deep down, Daniel longed for more than just caring for someone else's horses. He dreamed of owning one himself, not just any horse, but a champion. Not for fame, not for fortune, but to prove that love, patience, and belief could turn even the most overlooked creature into something extraordinary. The townspeople, however, didn't understand Daniel's heart. They saw him as nothing more than a poor stable hand. When he talked about his dreams of owning a horse and training it to win races, people laughed. "Daniel, you can barely afford to buy food," one man sneered at the local market. "How are you going to afford a racehorse?" "You think love feeds a horse?" Another woman chuckled. "They eat more in a week than you probably make in a month." Even the children teased him, galloping around him in circles, pretending to be horses while chanting, "Daniel the dreamer, Daniel the fool." But Daniel never let their words sink too deep. He would return home after long days at the stable, sit on his front porch, and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. And as the first stars blinked to life, he would close his eyes and imagine standing on a racetrack, the wind rushing past him as he rode a horse no one else believed in, a horse that the world had counted out. One night, he whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, I don't need riches. I don't need luxury. But if you give me a chance, just one chance, I promise I'll take care of whatever you place in my hands." Months later, news spread like wildfire through town. A prestigious horse auction was coming to the nearby city. Millionaires, elite breeders, and the wealthiest horse owners from across the country were attending. The horses up for auction were the best of the best, sleek, powerful creatures with bloodlines traced to generations of champions. The event was set to be a grand spectacle. People wore their finest clothes, carriages rolled into town carrying wealthy bidders, and the stables filled with the sound of hooves clopping against polished wood floors. The horses were meticulously groomed, their coats gleaming like silk under the sunlight. Daniel's heart raced when he heard the news. He knew he couldn't afford one of those horses. Not even close. But something inside him wouldn't let the thought go. What if, just what if he went? Maybe, just maybe, a miracle could happen. The night before the auction, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, counting every dollar he had. Crinkled bills. A handful of coins. All together, it added up to barely over $100. He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. The entry fee alone would cost him half of that, leaving him with almost nothing to bid with. Logic screamed at him to stay home, to save what little money he had for food and rent. But his heart, oh, his heart, kept whispering, "Go." So, at sunrise, Daniel put on his cleanest shirt, laced up his worn-out boots, and walked miles to the auction grounds. The closer he got, the louder the noise of the crowd grew. Laughter, chatter, and the rhythmic pounding of hooves. When he arrived, he felt wildly out of place. Wealthy men and women dressed in tailored suits and glittering jewelry sipped champagne under elegant tents. Auctioneers in crisp uniforms checked their lists, and trainers led magnificent horses through the grounds, their muscles rippling like living sculptures. Daniel swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the few dollars in his pocket. But he stood tall, brushing the dust from his shirt. He didn't come for the spectacle. He came for the chance, no matter how small, that maybe, just maybe, today would be the day his life changed forever. The auction grounds buzzed with excitement, a sea of luxury and privilege. Rows of pristine white chairs lined the grandstands, and waiters in crisp uniforms weaved through the crowd carrying trays of sparkling drinks. The air smelled of polished leather, freshly cut grass, and expensive perfume. Daniel stood at the very back of the crowd, his calloused hands stuffed into his pockets. His boots, worn thin from years of labor, crunched against the gravel as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. He tried to ignore the curious glances from people who clearly noticed he didn't belong. A man in a tailored suit eyed Daniel with disdain. "Lost are you?" he sneered, adjusting the gold cufflinks on his sleeve. Daniel simply shook his head. "I'm here for the auction," he said quietly. The man chuckled and turned to his companions. "He's here for the auction," he repeated, and the group erupted in laughter. Daniel's face burned, but he didn't move. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there for a horse, a chance, no matter how small, to make his dream a reality. The auctioneer, a tall man with a booming voice, stepped onto the platform and tapped the microphone. The chatter in the crowd hushed to a low hum as the first horse was brought out. The animal was stunning, a black stallion with a coat that shimmered in the sunlight like polished obsidian. Its muscles rippled beneath its skin, and it held its head high, nostrils flaring as it pranced around the ring. "This," the auctioneer announced, "is Shadow's Fury, son of Midnight Blaze, winner of last year's Grand Derby. We'll start the bidding at $100,000. Hands shot into the air, without hesitation. 110. 150. 200. The numbers climbed faster than Daniel's heart could beat. He didn't even try to keep up. He just watched, mesmerized, as horse after horse sold for staggering amounts. A chestnut mare went for $300,000. A dapple gray colt for $450,000. The crowd applauded as each sale concluded, the winning bidders beaming with pride as they signed the paperwork. Daniel's chest tightened. The few crumpled bills in his pocket felt like a cruel joke compared to the vast wealth flowing freely around him. Still, he stayed, because hope, no matter how fragile, refused to die. After hours of intense bidding, the auctioneer wiped his brow and adjusted his tie. The crowd had thinned, many of the wealthiest bidders already satisfied with their purchases. The energy had faded, replaced by idle chatter and sips of champagne. "Well," the auctioneer said with a forced smile, "we've come to the last horse of the day." A handler let out a frail, scrawny colt. Its coat was dull, patchy in places, and it limped as it walked. The horse's ribs showed through its thin frame, and a scar ran down its left hind leg. The crowd murmured in disappointment. "What a waste of time," someone muttered. "I wouldn't take that horse if they paid me," another said, wrinkling her nose. The handler struggled to keep the colt calm as it flinched at every sound. It lowered its head, trembling, as if it had already accepted its fate. Daniel's heart ached at the sight. He saw more than the horse's weakness. He saw fear, pain, and exhaustion. But he also saw something else. In the colt's eyes, buried beneath the trauma, was a flicker of fight. A tiny, fragile spark. The auctioneer cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Let's start the bidding at $500, he said, his voice lacking the enthusiasm he'd had for the earlier horses. The crowd laughed. $500, a man snorted. "For that bag of bones?" "I wouldn't pay $50, another said, waving a dismissive hand. The auctioneer scanned the audience, hopeful for any bid. But no hands went up. People turned away, gathering their belongings and preparing to leave. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He felt like his feet were made of stone. He didn't know what overcame him, whether it was compassion, desperation, or the stirring of that small, relentless hope. But his hand shot into the air. $100, he called out. The crowd erupted into cruel laughter. $100? Is he joking? Save your money, kid. Maybe he wants a lawn ornament. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing at Daniel with surprise. $100 going once? The laughter grew louder, echoing around Daniel like thunder. His face burned, but he stood firm, his hand unwavering. Going twice. The auctioneer slammed the gavel down with an almost pitying look. Sold, to the gentleman in the back. The crowd clapped mockingly, some people whistling as Daniel walked forward to claim the horse. The handler shoved the rope into Daniel's hand, barely concealing his smirk. Good luck with that one, he muttered, shaking his head. Daniel ignored the mockery. He knelt before the trembling colt, carefully stroking its nose. The horse flinched at first, but didn't pull away. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. You're not worthless, he said, tears welling in his eyes. You just need someone to believe in you. And in that moment, Daniel knew. He hadn't bought a broken horse. He had found hope. The sun hung low in the sky as Daniel led the frail colt home. The laughter of the crowd still echoed in his mind, but he pushed the memory aside, focusing instead on the trembling creature beside him. The horse limped with every step, its thin legs wobbling on the uneven dirt road. We'll take it slow, Daniel whispered, gently rubbing the colt's neck. I'm not in a rush. It took them hours to make the journey back to Daniel's modest cottage. By the time they arrived, the colt collapsed in exhaustion, its chest heaving as it lay in the straw Daniel had spread out beside his small barn. Daniel knelt next to the horse, tears stinging his eyes. What did they do to you? He murmured, noticing old scars along the horse's legs and back. He carefully examined the injured hoof, wincing at the sight of the infection. It was clear the horse had been neglected, maybe even abused. Daniel stayed by the colt's side long into the night, wiping its body with a damp cloth to cool its fever. He didn't sleep. He just watched over the fragile creature, praying silently. If you brought him to me, Lord, I'll do everything I can to save him. By dawn, the colt stirred, its eyelids fluttering open. It blinked, disoriented, before lifting its head to look at Daniel. For the first time, the horse didn't flinch away. Daniel smiled. Good morning, buddy, he whispered, offering a handful of hay. The colt sniffed it cautiously before nibbling at the food. It wasn't much, but it was a start. You need a name, Daniel said, watching the horse eat. Can't call you Colt forever, can I? He thought back to the moment he first saw the horse, the way it had trembled, beaten down and afraid. And yet, there had been that tiny spark in its eyes, that stubborn refusal to give up. Hope, Daniel said softly. Your name is Hope. The colt lifted its head, ears twitching as if it had understood. And Daniel felt his chest swell with warmth. The days turned into weeks, and every moment was a battle. Hope's infected hoof needed daily cleaning, and Daniel worked tirelessly to treat it with homemade remedies. He scoured books from the local library, learning everything he could about horse care and physical therapy. He couldn't afford a vet, so he became one. When Hope's appetite waned, Daniel rationed his own food to buy better hay. He mixed special grains, adding herbs he'd read could boost a horse's strength. Sometimes he went to bed hungry, but Hope never did. Training was even harder. At first, Hope couldn't even trot without stumbling. Daniel walked alongside him every morning, guiding him around the pasture. He built makeshift obstacles out of tree branches, gently encouraging Hope to step over them to rebuild his strength. There were setbacks. Some days, Hope refused to move, lying in the grass with eyes full of exhaustion. Other days, he bucked in fear, as if haunted by memories of past mistreatment. Once, he accidentally kicked Daniel while panicking, bruising his ribs. But Daniel never raised his voice. He never gave up. It's okay, he whispered, sitting beside Hope in the pasture after another failed training session. We'll try again tomorrow. And they did. Every single day. One morning, Daniel woke to the sound of hooves against the earth. He rushed outside, heart racing, and froze. Hope was running. Not fast. Not gracefully. But running. Daniel fell to his knees, tears pouring down his face as he watched the colt gallop across the field, mane catching the morning light like strands of gold. You're doing it, Daniel cried, laughing through his sobs. You're really doing it. Hope slowed to a stop, chest heaving, and trotted back to Daniel. The horse gently nudged his shoulder, snorting softly. Daniel buried his face in Hope's neck, holding him tightly. They had fought for this moment. And they had won. Word spread through the town like wildfire. People walking by Daniel's property would stop and gape at the horse racing through the field, a stark contrast to the broken creature Daniel had led home weeks earlier. "I can't believe that's the same horse," one man muttered to another. "I thought it wouldn't survive a week," a woman whispered, eyes wide. The same people who had laughed at Daniel now watched in silence, unable to deny the transformation. And Daniel? He wasn't done yet. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching Hope graze, he saw a flyer fluttering in the breeze, caught on the fence. He walked over and plucked it free, his eyes scanning the words. It was an announcement for an upcoming horse racing competition, the biggest in the region. The grand prize was enough to change Daniel's life forever. He looked at Hope, who lifted his head and flicked his tail. A spark ignited in Daniel's chest. "We're entering that race," he whispered, determination hardening his voice. Hope neighed, as if accepting the challenge. They had come this far. Why not go even further? Daniel pinned the race flyer to the wall of his small barn, right above Hope's stall. Every morning, as he fed Hope and brushed his coat, his eyes lingered on the bold letters. Annual Golden Valley Horse Race Grand Prize, $50,000. $50,000. Enough to buy proper land, build a real stable, and finally give Hope the life he deserved. But it wasn't just about the money. Daniel wanted to prove that Hope, the frail, broken horse everyone had mocked, was capable of greatness. He wanted to show the world that love and belief could resurrect what had been discarded. "People are going to laugh at us again," Daniel said one evening, rubbing Hope's forehead as the horse munched on hay. "But that's okay. Let them laugh. We've got work to do." Hope snorted and flicked his tail, as if agreeing. Daniel didn't have a proper racetrack. His property was just a patch of land bordered by rickety fences. But he made the most of it. He used overturned barrels as training markers, stacking old wooden crates to create practice jumps. He marked the ground with sticks to measure out a rough track. Every morning, he and Hope trained until the sun climbed high in the sky, and every evening, they practiced again until the stars blinked to life. At first, Hope couldn't make it a full lap without stumbling. His muscles were still weak, and his old injuries flared up after too much exertion. But Daniel didn't push too hard. He let Hope rest, massaged his legs, and whispered words of encouragement. "You're getting stronger," he'd say, rubbing Hope's side. "I can see it. We just need a little more time." Day by day, Hope improved. His stride lengthened. His legs grew steadier. And one morning, as Daniel stood by the fence, stopwatch in hand, Hope raced around the makeshift track without faltering once. Daniel checked the time, and his heart skipped a beat. They had a shot. As news spread that Daniel was entering the race, the town erupted in laughter. "Is he serious?" One man chuckled at the market. "That broken-down horse can barely walk straight. Maybe they'll give him a ribbon for trying," a woman sneered. "Or a participation trophy." Even Daniel's old boss at the stable shook his head when he heard the rumors. "I feel bad for the kid," he told a customer. "He doesn't understand what he's up against. These races attract the best horses in the region, animals with million-dollar bloodlines. His horse? It's a miracle that thing's still alive." The ridicule was relentless. People would walk by Daniel's property just to lean against the fence and jeer. "Are you training for a real race or a comedy show?" someone shouted one afternoon. Daniel ignored them. And so did Hope. Because they weren't racing for the town. They were racing for each other. The more they trained, the deeper their bond grew. Hope no longer flinched when Daniel raised his hand. He no longer hesitated when Daniel climbed onto his back. The horse who had once cowered in fear now stood tall, head high, trusting Daniel with every ounce of his being. Daniel spoke to Hope constantly as they trained. "Trust me, buddy. I won't let you fall." And Hope ran like he believed every word. They fell into a rhythm, a language all their own. Daniel didn't need to yank the reins or shout commands. A slight shift in his weight, a subtle squeeze of his legs, and Hope understood. They moved as one, as if their hearts beat in sync. The evening before the race, Daniel sat in the barn, polishing the old saddle he'd borrowed from a neighbor. Hope stood beside him, calmly nibbling hay. Daniel's fingers trembled as he worked the cloth over the leather. His chest felt tight, his mind spinning with doubt. What if they lost? What if the townspeople were right? What if all their effort had been for nothing? He set the saddle down and buried his face in his hands. God, I don't know if we can do this, he whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough. He felt a gentle nudge against his shoulder. When he looked up, Hope was staring at him with soft, steady eyes. Daniel let out a shaky laugh, wiping at his tears. You believe in me, huh? Hope neighed and stomped his hoof. Daniel smiled, brushing his hand along Hope's nose. Okay, he whispered. Then I'll believe in us, too. He leaned his forehead against Hope's, closing his eyes as he breathed in the scent of hay and horse. Win or lose, Daniel said, voice thick with emotion. You saved me, Hope. You're already my champion. And as the barn filled with the quiet hum of crickets and the soft rustle of straw, Daniel felt a deep peace settle over his soul. Tomorrow they would race, not to prove something to the town, but to prove something to themselves. That hope, no matter how small, could carry you farther than you ever imagined. The sun barely peeked over the horizon when Daniel woke. His body ached from weeks of relentless training, but he sprang out of bed with a rush of nervous energy. Today was the day. He stepped outside to find Hope already awake, standing at the fence and gazing out at the distant hills. The horse's chestnut coat gleamed in the morning light, muscles rippling beneath the surface, a stark contrast to the frail creature Daniel had brought home from the auction. Daniel rested his forehead against Hope's. Today we run. Hope snorted, pawing at the ground. After a quick breakfast, a piece of dry bread for Daniel, fresh hay and oats for Hope, they set off for the racetrack. Daniel couldn't afford a trailer, so he walked Hope the entire way, leading him down the dirt road like they had done so many times before. The walk felt symbolic. They weren't arriving in luxury. They were arriving with grit and determination. And that was enough. The Golden Valley racetrack was enormous. The freshly raked dirt glowed golden under the sun, and the stands overflowed with spectators. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and vendors sold overpriced snacks to excited onlookers. The competitors arrived in sleek horse trailers, their animals stepping out like royalty. These horses were enormous, their coats polished to a mirror-like sheen, their manes braided with silk ribbons. Trainers stretched the horses' legs, and jockeys in bright silks tested their saddles. Owners in designer suits paced along the fence, talking to reporters about their horses' impeccable bloodlines and prestigious racing pedigrees. And then there was Daniel. In dusty jeans and scuffed boots, he led Hope onto the track. His heart thudded as the crowd began to notice him. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is that the auction horse? No way. It can't be. I thought that thing died. Laughter rippled through the stands like a cruel wave. A wealthy horse owner, Mr. Carrington, spotted Daniel and burst out laughing. His horse, a sleek black stallion named Thunderstrike, was one of the favorites to win. I can't believe you actually showed up. Carrington sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. What are you hoping for, kid? That we'll all trip and let your broken-down nag crawl across the finish line? The people around him cackled, clapping each other on the back like they'd heard the joke of the century. Daniel's face burned, but he gently stroked Hope's neck, steadying his heartbeat. I'm just here to race, Daniel said, voice calm. Carrington smirked. Race? That thing can barely stand. Just then, Hope lifted his head and locked eyes with Carrington's stallion. The chestnut horse snorted and pawed at the ground, muscles rippling. Thunderstrike flinched and turned away. Daniel chuckled under his breath. Guess we'll see, won't we? Daniel guided Hope to the jockey's area. He didn't have an official team, just himself. While the other horses had entire crews brushing air coats, adjusting saddles, and checking vitals, Daniel did it all alone. He wiped Hope's face with a damp cloth, adjusted the stirrups, and whispered reassurances into his ear. "You've got this," Daniel whispered. "I know you do." Hope gently bumped Daniel with his nose, his eyes shining with trust. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "Racers, please take your positions." Daniel climbed into the saddle, his fingers trembling around the reins. He took a deep breath, staring out at the track. The starting gates loomed ahead, massive and metallic, like prison bars. He glanced around at the other riders. They looked confident,
Polished.
unshakable. But Daniel had something they didn't. He had hope, and hope had him. The riders guided their horses into the gates, the massive metal structures clanging shut behind them. The air grew heavy with tension, the crowd quieting in anticipation. Daniel adjusted his grip on the reins, feeling Hope's heartbeat thudding beneath him like a war drum. He leaned down, speaking directly into Hope's ear. "Run like you were made for this." Hope snorted, muscles coiling like a loaded spring. The announcer's voice echoed across the track. "On your marks." Daniel's fingers tightened. "Get set." The world went silent. Daniel's entire life, every hardship, every failure, every broken dream, balanced on this moment. The gunshot exploded. The gates flew open, and Hope surged forward like a bolt of lightning. The crowd erupted as the horses thundered down the track, dirt flying in every direction. The favorites immediately surged ahead, their powerful strides pounding against the earth like sledgehammers. Daniel and Hope were dead last. But Daniel wasn't worried. He leaned forward, voice steady as he spoke into Hope's ear. "Stay with me, buddy."
Steady.
"We pace ourselves." Hope's hooves struck the ground in a perfect rhythm, his breathing controlled and even. The other horses sprinted like they wanted to win the race in the first stretch. But Daniel knew better. He'd studied horse racing. He'd learned the mistakes rookies made. The real race wasn't the beginning. The real race was the end. "We wait," Daniel whispered, guiding Hope along the inside rail. "We wait, and then we fly." Hope's ears twitched, listening, understanding. They weren't out of the race. They were just getting started. The thunder of hooves echoed like a heartbeat through the racetrack. The other horses bolted ahead, their riders urging them on with fierce determination. Daniel and Hope trailed at the back, their steady pace almost laughable in comparison to the frontrunners. Spectators pointed and snickered. "Why did he even bother showing up?" someone jeered. "He's already lost," another yelled. Even Mr. Carrington smirked from the stands, leaning back in his seat with an air of victory. "This isn't a fairy tale," he muttered to the people around him. "The underdog never wins in the real world." But Daniel blocked out the noise. He focused on Hope, the rhythm of his breathing, the way his muscles moved, the steadiness in his stride. "We're not done yet," Daniel whispered, leaning close to Hope's ear. Hope's ears flicked back, listening, understanding. They trusted each other. And they had a plan. By the halfway point, the frontrunners began to tire. The horses who had sprinted too hard, too fast, started to slow. Their strides shortened, and their heads dipped, sweat glistening on their coats. One horse, a towering gray stallion, stumbled slightly, losing ground. Another rider tugged desperately on the reins, trying to keep control as his horse lagged behind. Daniel's heart pounded. "Now, Hope," he whispered. "Let's move." Hope surged forward, his stride lengthening with surprising ease. He slipped past the faltering horses like a shadow, his hooves barely seeming to touch the ground. Spectators gasped as the poor, broken auction horse overtook not one, not two, but 4 horses in a matter of seconds. "He's catching up," someone shouted. That can't be possible. But it was happening. Hope wasn't tired. He was just getting started. As they reached the final turn, only 3 horses remained ahead. Thunderstrike, Carrington's prize stallion, powerful and unyielding. Stormchaser, a sleek white mare known for her blistering speed. Blaze, a fiery chestnut horse, famous for dominating local races. Daniel leaned into the turn, guiding Hope along the inner rail. Dirt flew into his face, sweat soaked through his clothes, but he didn't care. He could feel Hope's strength beneath him, a raw, untamed power that had been forged through pain and nurtured with love. "We can do this," Daniel breathed. Hope responded with a burst of speed, closing the distance with Blaze. Within seconds, they passed him. The crowd roared. "No way. He's in third." Carrington's face twisted with fury as he whipped his reins, urging Thunderstrike to go faster. But Daniel didn't push Hope. He just whispered, "Fly." The finish line loomed in the distance, the crowd on their feet, screaming. Thunderstrike and Stormchaser galloped neck and neck, their riders frantically urging them forward. Daniel and Hope were a length behind. "We're almost there," Daniel panted, leaning forward, pressing himself against Hope's neck. "I know you've got more." And Hope, the horse no one believed in, unleashed everything. His muscles burned, his hooves pounded the earth like a war drum, and he flew. They passed Stormchaser, like she was standing still. Now it was just them and Thunderstrike. Carrington glanced back, panic flashing in his eyes. He yanked on the reins, shouting, "Faster!" But Thunderstrike was spent. His strides grew sloppy, his breaths ragged. Hope, however, ran like he was weightless. Like he was running not just for victory, but for the little boy who had saved him. For the second chance neither of them was ever supposed to get. The finish line blurred as they approached. It was too close to call. Carrington screamed, desperation contorting his face as he pushed Thunderstrike to the breaking point. But Daniel didn't scream. He simply whispered, "Go, Hope, go." And with one final, miraculous surge, Hope stretched out his neck and crossed the finish line. By inches. The racetrack fell silent for a heartbeat. Then the announcer's voice rang out, shaking the stadium. "Hope wins." The stands erupted. People screamed and jumped, clutching their heads in disbelief. Hope skidded to a stop, chest heaving, sides glistening with sweat. Daniel slid off the saddle, falling to his knees in the dirt, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he whispered, hugging Hope's neck, sobbing into his mane. "You did it, buddy. You really did it." Carrington stormed off the track, his face beet red, while reporters swarmed Daniel. Microphones shoved in his face, cameras flashing, people shouting questions. "How did you train that horse? Where did Hope come from? What will you do with the $50,000 prize?" Daniel wiped his face and smiled through his tears. "I'm going to build Hope a real home," he said, voice shaking. "And I'm going to help other horses like him." The crowd, the same people who had once laughed at him, erupted into applause. They chanted Hope's name. And as the sun set over the racetrack, casting golden light over the field, Daniel stood beside the horse who had been discarded as worthless. The horse who had proven everyone wrong. The horse who had taught him that hope is never lost, even when the world tells you otherwise. Daniel and Hope went on to inspire millions. Their story spread like wildfire, a living testament to resilience, kindness, and the magic that happens when you refuse to give up. People traveled from miles around to meet Hope, bringing sick and injured horses to Daniel's growing sanctuary. Donations poured in, enough to build proper stables, a racetrack, and a rehab facility. And at the entrance of the sanctuary, a wooden sign proudly bore the words, "Hope's Haven, where every horse gets a second chance." Daniel often stood by that sign, watching the horses run freely in the pastures, his heart full. He'd lean down, rubbing Hope's face as they watched the sunset together. "We were never supposed to win that race," Daniel would say with a soft laugh. And Hope would snort, as if to say, "But we did."